My 9-year-old asked why they have to call their stepdad sir. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Mom, why do I have to call Mr. Derek sir and stand up straight like a soldier when he talks to me? I nearly dropped the juice box I was handing to my 9-year-old son, Mason. We were sitting in our tiny kitchen on Sunday evening, the remnants of his favorite chicken nuggets still scattered across his Batman plate. He'd just gotten back from his weekend at his dad's place, the same dad who used to let Mason build blanket forts and eat cereal for dinner when it was just the two of them. What do you mean, sweetheart? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I sat down across from him. Mason's shoulders were unnaturally rigid, and I noticed how he kept his hands folded neatly in his lap, nothing like a wiggly, energetic kid who'd left here Friday afternoon. Mr. Derek says I have to ask permission to use the bathroom. And I have to say, sir, may I please use the restroom, sir? If I forget the sir part, I have to do 10 push-ups. Mason's voice was matter of fact, like he was reciting homework instructions. Dad says Mr. Derek knows about discipline because he was in the army and I need to learn respect. My blood turned to ice. Derek Morrison, my ex-husband Brad's new wife Stephanie's boyfriend who'd moved in with him just 3 months ago. I'd met him exactly once during pickup, and something about his steel gray eyes and the way he stood with his arms crossed had made my skin crawl. Stephanie had gushed about how structured and organized he was, how he'd been a drill sergeant for 12 years before his medical discharge. Mason, baby, what else does Mr. Derek make you do? I have to make my bed with hospital corners every morning, and if it's not tight enough for a quarter to bounce, I have to strip it and start over. And I can't sit on the couch until he inspects my room. Dad says it's good for me. Mason picked at a loose thread on his Pokemon t-shirt. But Mom, I don't understand why I can't just call him Derek like before. And why do I have to stand up every time he comes in the room? The chicken nuggets I'd eaten earlier threatened to come back up. How long has this been going on, sweetheart? Since Mr. Derek moved in. But it's gotten worse. Yesterday I had to eat dinner standing up because I forgot to ask permission before sitting down. His big brown eyes, the same ones that used to light up when Brad would tickle him until he squealed with laughter, looked confused and tired. Is that normal, Mom? Tommy's stepdad just lets him call him by his first name. I reached across the table and took Mason's small hands in mine. They were trembling slightly. No, baby. That's not normal. And it's not okay. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad. Hope Mason told you about the new rules. Derek thinks structure will help with his attitude problem. Kid needs to learn some respect. Don't interfere, Sarah. Attitude problem? Mason was the sweetest, most polite kid I knew. The only attitude problem here was a grown man who apparently thought terrorizing a 9-year-old was acceptable parenting. I looked at my son, who was now quietly asking if he could please be excused from the table, and made a decision that would change everything. This wasn't discipline. This was abuse. And I wasn't going to let it continue for another single weekend. After Mason went to bed, I spent 3 hours researching Derek Morrison online. What I found made my stomach churn. His LinkedIn showed a spotless military record, 12 years as a drill sergeant at Fort Campbell, medical discharge in 2019. But digging deeper through Facebook and a few military forums, I discovered complaints from parents at a youth military camp where he'd worked briefly. Parents talking about their kids coming home different after Derek's leadership workshops. One mother had written, my 12-year-old son wet the bed for 2 weeks after Derek Morrison's character-building weekend. He made the kids stand in formation for hours and wouldn't let them drink water until they earned it. The post was from 8 months ago. The camp had quietly let Derek go shortly after. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking as I created a folder labeled evidence on my laptop. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Brad. Sarah, we need to talk. You're damn right we do. I kept my voice low, not wanting to wake Mason. What the hell is going on over there, Brad? Derek explained his methods to me. The military structure is exactly what Mason needs. You've been too soft on him, and now he's disrespectful and unfocused. Derek's just teaching him. Teaching him what? To be terrified? He asked permission to go to the bathroom in our own house tonight, Brad. He stood up when I walked into the living room. A 9-year-old shouldn't be scared in his father's home. Brad's voice hardened. He's not scared, he's learning discipline. Derek says most kids today are spoiled brats because parents don't set proper boundaries. Mason needs to understand authority. Mason understands authority just fine. What he doesn't understand is why some stranger is treating him like a military recruit. He's a child, not a soldier. Derek's not a stranger. He's going to be Stephanie's husband soon, which makes him Mason's stepfather. And as his stepfather, he has every right to establish rules in his own home. The words hit me like a physical blow. They're engaged? I was going to tell you next week. They're getting married in 6 months. Derek's already started adoption paperwork to make it official. He wants to give Mason his last name, make him a real Morrison. My hands went numb. You can't be serious. Dead serious. And Sarah, if you try to interfere with our parenting decisions, I'll file for full custody. Derek thinks Mason would benefit from consistent structure, and frankly, I agree. The way you coddle him isn't doing him any favors. Coddle him? I love him, Brad. There's a difference between loving your child and terrifying him into submission. Love without discipline isn't love, it's neglect. Derek showed me articles about it. Mason needs a strong male role model who won't bend to his every whim. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process what I was hearing. This was the same man who used to sing Disney songs with Mason during bath time, who'd call me in tears when Mason skinned his knee at the playground. When did you become this person? I whispered. I became the person Mason needs me to be. Derek's helped me see that. And if you can't support what's best for our son, maybe Mason would be better off living here full-time where he can get proper guidance. The line went dead. I sat in my dark kitchen, staring at my phone, realizing that my ex-husband, the man I'd once loved enough to marry, to have a child with, had just threatened to take my son away so his fiancé's military-obsessed boyfriend could continue psychologically torturing him. But Brad had made one crucial mistake. He'd just given me 6 months to stop a wedding and save my son. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a notepad, and 3 cups of cold coffee, planning my strategy like I was preparing for war. Because that's exactly what this was, a war for my son's well-being. At 6:30 a.m., I called in sick to work and drove Mason to school early. I needed to talk to someone who knew him well, someone who could document any changes in his behavior. Mrs. Patterson, Mason's third-grade teacher, agreed to meet me in her classroom before the other kids arrived. She was a motherly woman in her 50s who'd been teaching for 27 years, nothing got past her. "I've been meaning to call you actually," she said, settling into the tiny plastic chair across from me. "Mason's been different since the school year started. More withdrawn, anxious. Last week he asked me if he needed permission to sharpen his pencil. When I said no, he looked genuinely confused. My heart sank. What else have you noticed? He stopped raising his hand in class, even though he knows the answers. During recess, he stands by himself instead of playing with the other kids. And yesterday." She hesitated. "Yesterday he had an accident. Wet himself during math class. When I asked why he didn't ask to use the bathroom, he said he was taught not to interrupt adults and wasn't sure if it was allowed." I closed my eyes. "How long has this been going on?" "About 6 weeks. Right around the time you mentioned his father's living situation had changed." She leaned forward. "Sarah, I've seen this before. This isn't normal adjustment anxiety. This is a child who's being conditioned to suppress his natural responses. Has something happened at his father's house?" I told her everything. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew increasingly grim as I described Derek's rules and Brad's threats. "I need you to document everything," I said. "Every behavioral change, every incident. Will you do that?" She nodded immediately. "I'll start a formal behavioral log today. And Sarah, I think you should talk to the school counselor too. Mrs. Rodriguez has dealt with custody situations before." An hour later, I was sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, which smelled like vanilla candles and had inspirational posters covering every wall. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "What you're describing sounds like psychological conditioning," she said after I'd explained everything. "Children Mason's age are particularly vulnerable to authoritarian control because they naturally want to please adults. But forcing a child to suppress basic needs like using the bathroom can cause long-term trauma. Can you help me document this?" "I can do better than that. I can recommend a child psychologist who specializes in custody evaluations. Her name is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, and she's testified in family court dozens of times. But Sarah, I have to ask, have you considered that your ex-husband might genuinely believe this is what's best for Mason?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes good parents make terrible decisions because they're influenced by someone they trust. Your ex-husband might not realize the damage being done. Before you go nuclear with legal action, you might want to try reaching out to his family. Do his parents know what's happening?" I felt a spark of hope. Brad's parents, Linda and Tom, had always adored Mason. They'd been devastated when Brad and I divorced but had made it clear they wanted to stay involved in their grandson's life. And Linda had never been shy about voicing her opinions when she thought Brad was making mistakes. "They live in Columbus," I said. "About 2 hours away." "When's the last time they saw Mason?" I thought about it. "Before Derek moved in. Brad's been making excuses about why they can't visit." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "That's not a coincidence. Men like Derek often isolate their victims from family members who might interfere with their control." I left the school with a plan. Step 1, call Dr. Walsh and schedule an evaluation for Mason. Step 2, drive to Columbus this weekend and have a very frank conversation with Linda and Tom Mitchell. Step 3, start building an army. But first, I had a phone call to make. At 2:15 p.m., I dialed Stephanie's work number. We'd never been friends, but we'd been civil for Mason's sake. It was time to find out exactly where she stood in all this. "Sarah?" She sounded surprised. "Is everything okay? Is it Mason?" "We need to talk, Stephanie. In person. Tonight." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "I can meet you at Starbucks on 5th Street at 7, she finally said. "But Derek can't know about this." The fear in her voice told me everything I needed to know. At exactly 7 p.m., I spotted Stephanie hunched over a corner table at Starbucks, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and her hands wrapped around a venti coffee like it was a lifeline. She looked up when I approached, and I was shocked by what I saw. Dark circles under her eyes, a nervous twitch in her left hand, and something that looked suspiciously like a fading bruise on her collarbone, barely hidden by her scarf. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. She glanced toward the door nervously. "I told Derek I was working late, but he sometimes checks up on me. We can't take too long." The way she said checks up made my skin crawl. "Stephanie, what's really going on in that house?" Her laugh was bitter and hollow. "You mean besides your ex-husband turning into someone I don't recognize? Besides Derek having opinions about everything from how I load the dishwasher to what time I go to bed? Tell me about Mason. Tell me what Derek's really doing to my son." Stephanie's composure cracked. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her hands. "I never wanted this, Sarah. When Derek moved in, he said he just wanted to help Mason become more disciplined. Brad was struggling with him on weekends, feeling like Mason didn't respect him anymore after the divorce. Mason adores his father. Or he did. I know. But Derek convinced Brad that love wasn't enough, that Mason needed structure. It started small, making his bed, saying please and thank you. But then it escalated." She wiped her nose with a napkin. "Last weekend, Mason spilled orange juice at breakfast. Derek made him clean it up with a toothbrush while standing at attention. It took 45 minutes. I gripped the edge of the table. And Brad allowed this? Brad wasn't there. He'd gone to Home Depot. When he got back, Derek told him Mason had been corrected for carelessness and that he'd handled it appropriately. Brad just believed him. Why didn't you stop it?" Stephanie's hand went unconsciously to her collarbone. "I tried. Once. Derek said if I interfered with his parenting methods, he'd leave, and then where would that put me? I've got 2 kids of my own from my first marriage, Sarah. I can't afford this apartment on my own, and Derek pays for everything now. My ex-husband stopped paying child support 8 months ago. The pieces clicked into place. Derek hadn't just isolated Brad from his family, he trapped Stephanie financially. Where are your kids during all this? With their dad in Phoenix for the school year. They're supposed to come back for Christmas break, but now Derek's talking about house rules they'll need to follow. He's already ordered bunk beds for them and printed out daily schedules. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sarah, I'm scared. Not just for Mason, but for Emma and Jake too. Emma's only 7, and she's spirited. She doesn't take orders well. Derek says spirited children need the most correction. I felt like I was staring into an abyss. We have to stop this. How? Brad thinks Derek walks on water. Yesterday Derek showed him some article about how military-style parenting creates successful adults, and Brad actually printed it out and highlighted sections. He's talking about enrolling Mason in Derek's old military camp this summer. The one Derek got fired from? Stephanie's head snapped up. What do you mean fired? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd saved. Her face went pale as she read the complaints from other parents. He told us he left to pursue other opportunities, she whispered. He was fired for traumatizing children, Stephanie. And now he's engaged to you and wants to adopt Mason. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. The engagement, that wasn't my idea. He proposed in front of Brad and Mason 3 weeks ago. How could I say no? You can say no now. You can leave. With what money? And even if I could, what about Mason? Derek's convinced Brad that you're an unfit mother. He's been collecting evidence, photos of toys left out in Mason's room, timestamps of when you drop him off, even documentation of what you pack for lunch. He says it proves you're too permissive and disorganized. The coffee I'd been sipping turned to acid in my stomach. Evidence for what? The custody case. Derek's already found Brad a lawyer. Some guy named Mitchell Reeves who specializes in father's rights cases. I knew that name. Mitchell Reeves had a reputation for being ruthless and expensive and effective. When? Derek wants to file the petition right after we get married. He says it'll look better if Brad has a stable 2-parent household to offer the court. 6 months had just become 4.5. Stephanie grabbed my hand across the table. Sarah, I know you have no reason to help me, but I need to get out. If you're planning something, if you're going to fight this, please, can you help me too? I can't let Derek get his hands on my children. And I can't watch what he's doing to Mason for another day. I looked into her desperate eyes and realized I'd just found my first ally in enemy territory. Pack a bag, I told her. Tonight. Hide it somewhere Derek won't find it. And Stephanie? Start recording everything. The next morning, I got a text from Stephanie at 6:47 a.m. Derek found my phone unlocked last night. He saw your contact. I told him you called about Mason's school project. He's suspicious. Be careful. My blood ran cold. I'd given Stephanie my number and told her to reach out if things escalated, but I hadn't considered how dangerous that might be for her. Derek struck me as the type who monitored everything. I was still staring at the message when my phone rang. Brad. We need to move up Mason's next visit, he said without preamble. Derek thinks it's important to establish more consistent routines. Instead of every other weekend, we want him Wednesday through Sunday, starting this week. Absolutely not. That's not what the custody agreement says. The custody agreement was written when Mason was younger and had different needs. Derek showed me research about how children of divorce benefit from longer periods of stability in one home. We're prepared to make this work for everyone. The way he said we like he and Derek were a united front made me nauseous. Mason has school, Brad. He has friends here, activities. He can transfer to the school district here. It's actually rated higher than yours. And Derek's already researched youth programs in the area that focus on character development and discipline. I could practically hear Derek's words coming out of Brad's mouth. You can't just uproot his entire life because your girlfriend's boyfriend has opinions about parenting. Fiancé's future husband, Brad corrected. And yes, I can. My lawyer says with proper documentation of the benefits to Mason's development, a judge will likely approve modified custody arrangements. Especially if we can demonstrate that the current situation isn't meeting his needs. Mitchell Reeves was already coaching him on what to say. What current situation? Mason is happy here. He's doing well in school. Is he? Because Derek documented 3 instances last weekend where Mason displayed concerning behaviors. Inability to follow simple instructions, emotional outbursts when corrected, and what appeared to be deliberate defiance. I gripped the phone harder. Defiance? He's 9 years old, Brad. 9-year-olds aren't defiant when they forget to ask permission to use the bathroom, they're being normal children. See, this is exactly what Derek means. You make excuses for behavior that needs correction. Mason cried for 15 minutes because Derek asked him to redo his bed properly. A well-adjusted child doesn't have emotional meltdowns over reasonable requests. A well-adjusted child doesn't get PTSD from making his bed either. The silence on the other end stretched too long. When Brad spoke again, his voice was ice cold. Did you just accuse Derek of giving Mason PTSD? Because that sounds dangerously close to making false allegations, Sarah. My lawyer specifically warned me that bitter ex-wives sometimes resort to that when they realize they're losing control. The threat was crystal clear. One more word about Derek's treatment, and they'd paint me as a vindictive ex-wife making things up to hurt Brad's new relationship. I want to talk to Mason tonight, I said instead. He'll be busy. Derek's enrolled him in an online etiquette course that runs from 7 to 8:30 every weeknight. It's important that he not miss sessions. An etiquette course. For a 9-year-old. I closed my eyes and tried to keep my voice level. Then I'll call after 8:30. Actually, Derek's established a household rule about screen time and phone calls after 8 p.m. It interferes with proper wind-down routines. You can call tomorrow at 6:15, before dinner preparations begin. 15 minutes. They were giving me 15 minutes a day to talk to my own son. Brad, please. Just listen to yourself. You're scheduling my conversations with Mason like he's in prison. I'm establishing structure in his life, Sarah. Something you never did. Mason needs to learn that actions have consequences and that respect isn't optional. The line went dead, and I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, realizing that Stephanie was right. This wasn't just about different parenting philosophies anymore. This was about control, manipulation, and a systematic plan to take my son away from me. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd gotten greedy, moving too fast, pushing too hard. And that desperation was going to be his downfall. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Dr. Jennifer Walsh. It was time to call in the professionals. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile, intimidating space I'd imagined, her consultation room felt warm and inviting, with soft lighting and child-friendly artwork on the walls. She was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an immediately reassuring presence. "I've reviewed the information you sent over," she said, settling into her chair with a thick folder. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to be direct with you. What you're describing shows classic signs of psychological conditioning and emotional abuse. The bathroom permission, the military-style punishments, the isolation from extended family, these are textbook control tactics." I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that a professional was taking this seriously, terror at hearing the word abuse applied to my son's situation. "Can you help us? I can evaluate Mason and provide expert testimony if this goes to court. But I need to warn you, these cases are complicated. Your ex-husband genuinely believes he's helping Mason, which means he'll fight any changes. And men like Derek Morrison are often very skilled at presenting themselves favorably to authority figures." She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I did some research on Mr. Morrison after our phone call. Beyond the military camp incident you mentioned, I found two other concerning patterns. He was married twice before, both wives filed restraining orders citing emotional abuse and controlling behavior. And he's been involved with 3 different families through dating over the past 2 years. In each case, there were children involved, and in each case, the relationships ended abruptly with the mother citing concerns about his treatment of their kids. My hands went cold. Does Brad know this? I doubt it. Derek's very careful about his image. But there's more. I reached out to a colleague who worked the military camp case. She told me Derek was investigated by base command twice during his final year of service for excessive disciplinary measures with young recruits. The medical discharge wasn't for injury, it was strongly suggested after several formal complaints. The room started spinning. He lied to Brad about everything. Manipulative individuals often create false narratives about their backgrounds. But here's what concerns me most, the timeline. You said he moved in 3 months ago, got engaged 3 weeks ago, and now they want to file for custody modification immediately after the wedding? That's right. Dr. Walsh leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, this isn't about discipline or helping Mason. This is about Derek establishing complete control over a family unit. Your son is essentially being used as a tool to manipulate your ex-husband and cement Derek's position as the authority figure." She pulled out another document. "I want to schedule Mason for a comprehensive psychological evaluation. It'll take about 4 hours spread across 2 sessions. I'll also need to interview you extensively about his behavior changes. But there's something else we need to discuss." My stomach dropped. What? Emergency custody modification. If Derek is escalating his control measures and they're planning to file for custody changes anyway, we might need to petition the court for immediate protection. I know a family law attorney named Rebecca Chen who specializes in emergency interventions. But Brad threatened to use any interference against me in court. He can try, but documented psychological abuse trumps parental alienation claims every time. Especially when there's a clear pattern of escalating control. She handed me a business card. "I'm recommending you call Rebecca today. Don't wait until they file first. You want to be the one presenting evidence to the court, not responding to their accusations." I stared at the card, my hands shaking. Everything was moving so fast. Dr. Walsh's voice gentled. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming. But you need to understand, Mason can't wait 6 months for you to build a perfect case. Every weekend he spends in that environment is causing psychological damage that may take years to undo. What if I lose? What if they convince a judge that I'm just a bitter ex-wife trying to sabotage Brad's happiness? Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We document everything, we build an airtight case, and we put Mason's well-being front and center." She closed the folder and looked me directly in the eyes. "But first, you need to decide how far you're willing to go to protect your son." I called Rebecca Chen from Dr. Walsh's parking lot, my hands still shaking as I dialed the number. Her assistant squeezed me in for a 4 p.m. emergency consultation, which gave me exactly 2 hours to drive across town and mentally prepare for what felt like the most important conversation of my life. Rebecca's law office was located in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel that made me feel small and out of place in my Target jeans and nervous energy. But the moment I met Rebecca herself, I felt a spark of hope. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and an intensity that reminded me she hadn't built her reputation by backing down from difficult cases. "Dr. Walsh sent over her preliminary notes," Rebecca said, spreading documents across her conference table. "Before we discuss legal strategy, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Tell me about Mason's last visit, everything, no matter how small." I walked her through Sunday's pickup, how Mason had stood rigidly by the door waiting for Derek's permission to leave, how he'd flinched when I reached to help him with his seatbelt, how he'd asked 3 times if it was okay to eat his chicken nuggets before Derek had said they were dismissed from the table. Rebecca's expression grew darker with each detail. "Sarah, what you're describing isn't discipline, it's systematic psychological conditioning designed to break down a child's sense of autonomy. How long has Brad been susceptible to this kind of influence?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Your ex-husband is essentially allowing another man to psychologically abuse his son. That suggests either he's being manipulated himself, or there's something else going on. When did his personality start changing?" I thought back to those final months of our marriage, Brad's increasing irritability, his sudden obsession with Mason being too soft, his complaints that I was babying our son. It started before Derek, actually. Maybe 6 months before we separated. Brad kept saying Mason needed to toughen up, that other dads were judging him for having a sensitive kid. "Insecurity about masculinity and parenting," Rebecca murmured, making notes. Derek probably identified that vulnerability immediately. Classic predatory behavior, find the weakness and exploit it. She looked up at me. Here's what we're going to do. I'm filing for emergency modification of custody arrangements tomorrow morning, requesting immediate suspension of overnight visits pending psychological evaluation. My heart hammered against my ribs. That fast? Derek's accelerating his timeline, so we accelerate ours. Dr. Walsh is scheduling Mason's evaluation for Thursday and Friday this week. I've also arranged for a court-appointed advocate to interview Mason privately, someone trained to recognize coaching or intimidation. She pulled out a thick legal document. But Sarah, I need you to understand what you're about to trigger. The moment I file this petition, Brad and his attorney will know you're fighting back. Derek will likely coach both Brad and Stephanie on how to respond, and they'll probably file counter-allegations claiming you're an unfit mother trying to alienate Mason from his father. Stephanie wants out, I said quickly. She's scared of Derek too. She might testify for us. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. The fiancé wants to testify against her own partner? That could be game-changing, but it's also extremely dangerous for her. Does she understand what she'd be risking? I think so. She has 2 kids of her own who are supposed to visit for Christmas. She's terrified of what Derek might do to them. We need to get her statement recorded immediately, before Derek realizes she's cooperating. Can you arrange a meeting? I nodded, already reaching for my phone to text Stephanie. But as I typed, a new message popped up that made my blood freeze. It was from Brad. Mason's teacher called about some behavioral concerns today. Derek thinks she might be coaching him to act out at school to make us look bad. We're moving his next visit to tomorrow night instead of Friday. Pickup is at 6 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Tomorrow. They were taking Mason tomorrow, 3 days early. I showed Rebecca the message, watching her face harden. They know, she said grimly. Someone tipped them off that you're building a case. How is that possible? School counselor, teacher, mutual friend, could be anyone. The important thing is we're out of time. She stood up and began gathering papers. I'm filing the emergency petition tonight. We'll request an immediate hearing for Thursday morning. What if the judge sides with them? What if Mason has to go anyway? Rebecca met my eyes with steely determination. Then we make sure Thursday morning never comes. There are provisions for emergency child protection when there's imminent risk of psychological harm. But Sarah, if we go that route, there's no turning back. You'll be directly defying a custody order. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Stephanie, can't meet. Derek checking my location every hour now. But I found something in his closet. Call me from a different number at exactly 8:23 p.m. when he goes to his AA meeting. AA meeting. Derek was in recovery, which meant he had his own vulnerabilities, his own secrets he was probably hiding from Brad. Rebecca, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. How do you feel about working until midnight tonight? At exactly 8:23 p.m., I called Stephanie from Rebecca's office phone while she worked frantically on the emergency petition beside me. The phone rang twice before Stephanie's whispered voice answered. Sarah? Thank God. I only have 37 minutes before Derek gets back. Her voice was tight with fear. I found a lockbox hidden behind his dress uniforms. Inside there's a folder labeled Mason Mitchell with photos, notes, even copies of his school records from last year. My stomach dropped. What kind of photos? Pictures of him sleeping, eating, playing in your backyard. Some of these were taken before Derek even moved in with us. Sarah, he's been watching Mason for months. I heard papers rustling. There's also a notebook with detailed observations about your routines. What time you drop him off at school, when you go grocery shopping, even notes about your work schedule and the fact that you called in sick last Tuesday. Rebecca looked up sharply from her laptop. I put the call on speaker. Stephanie, this is Rebecca Chen, Sarah's attorney. Are you somewhere safe right now? I'm in Derek's office. He always locks it, but I found where he hides the spare key. Rebecca, there's more. There's correspondence with someone named Dr. Marcus Webb about preliminary assessment protocols and something called behavioral modification documentation for family court proceedings. Rebecca's face went white. Dr. Webb testified against 3 mothers in custody cases last year. He's not a real child psychologist. He's a hired gun who rubber stamps whatever the father's rights attorneys want to hear. She leaned toward the phone. Stephanie, they've been planning this for months, possibly since before Derek moved in. Can you photograph everything? I'm trying, but my hands are shaking and some of the writing is really small. There was a pause, then Stephanie's voice came back more urgent. Oh my God. There's a section titled Timeline for Custody Transfer, dated 2 months ago. It has phases listed. Phase 1, Establish authority in household. Phase 2, Document behavioral improvements and maternal deficiencies. Phase 3, Secure engagement and stable home environment. Phase 4, File for modification. I felt like I was going to be sick. What phase are they in now? According to this, Phase 4 was supposed to begin next month, but there's a handwritten note that says, subject's mother showing signs of interference. Accelerate timeline to prevent disruption. Sarah, they know you're onto them. Rebecca was typing furiously. Stephanie, I need you to get photos of everything, especially any communications with Dr. Webb and the timeline document. But more importantly, you need to get out of that house tonight. I can't. Derek monitors my bank account. If I use my debit card anywhere unusual, he gets alerts on his phone. And he has the titles to both cars in his name now. He said it was for insurance purposes, but... Her voice broke. I'm trapped. And if I run now, Emma and Jake are supposed to fly in next week for Christmas break. If I'm not here, they'll go straight into Derek's custody. A car door slammed in the background, and Stephanie's breathing became rapid. He's back early. I have to go. Sarah, whatever you're planning to do it fast. I overheard him on the phone today talking about permanent solutions and something about Mason needing residential treatment for his behavioral issues. Stephanie, don't hang up. The line went dead. Rebecca and I stared at each other in the sudden silence. Residential treatment? I whispered. Military boarding schools, therapeutic wilderness programs, there are dozens of places that take kids as young as 8 for behavioral modification. Parents sign over educational and medical custody, and some of these places. She shook her head grimly. Sarah, we're not just talking about weekend visits anymore. If Derek gets custody, he could have Mason institutionalized within weeks. My phone rang. Brad again. I've been thinking about our conversation, he said, his voice unnaturally calm. Derek suggested that maybe Mason would benefit from some professional evaluation. We found an excellent residential program in Utah that specializes in helping children from broken homes develop proper coping mechanisms. Utah. I'd heard horror stories about those wilderness programs. Brad, you can't be serious. Mason's clearly struggling with the transition to a more structured environment. Derek thinks some intensive therapy might help him adjust better. It's only for 6 months, and they have an excellent success rate. Rebecca was frantically writing notes and sliding them toward me. Stall him. Keep him talking. Record this. I hit the record button on my phone. What kind of program, exactly? 3 Peaks Academy. They focus on outdoor therapy and building character through challenge-based learning. Derek actually visited there last month and was very impressed with their methods. Last month. While I thought Derek was just playing house with Brad and Stephanie, he'd been touring facilities to send my son away. Brad, please, just slow down for a minute. Mason doesn't need residential treatment. He needs his family. His family is trying to help him, Sarah. But if you keep interfering with our decisions, you might not be part of that family much longer. The threat hung in the air like poison. What exactly do you mean by that? I asked, my voice barely steady as Rebecca continued scribbling notes beside me. Derek's attorney found some interesting information about your background, Sarah. Apparently you've been seeing a therapist for the past year and a half. Dr. Monica Reeves, yes, same family as my lawyer. Small world. Brad's tone was casual, almost conversational, which made his words even more chilling. Anxiety and depression stemming from our divorce. Some concerning notes about your ability to cope with stress and maintain stability for Mason. My blood turned to ice. Dr. Reeves had been helping me process the divorce and adjust to single motherhood. Our sessions were supposed to be confidential. How did you get access to my medical records? I didn't. But when you're filing for custody modification, the court requires extensive background checks on all parties involved. Funny how much information becomes relevant when a child's welfare is at stake. He paused, and I could practically hear Derek coaching him in the background. Mason mentioned you've been crying a lot lately. Having trouble sleeping. That you called in sick to work multiple times this month. Every private moment, every vulnerable conversation with my 9-year-old son had been turned into ammunition against me. Brad, seeking therapy doesn't make me an unfit mother. It makes me a responsible one. Maybe. Or maybe it shows you're not equipped to handle the pressures of raising a boy who needs strong guidance. Derek pointed out that unstable mothers often try to compensate by being overly permissive, which creates anxious, confused children. Rebecca slid another note toward me. He's trying to build a mental health case. Don't defend yourself. I want to see Mason tonight, I said instead. Actually, that's not going to work. Derek enrolled him in a special leadership camp that starts tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. It's a 3-day intensive program designed to help kids build confidence and respect for authority. Mason was very excited about it. My hands started shaking. 3 days. They were taking Mason for 3 days to some camp run by Derek's associates, probably to further condition him before the custody hearing. What camp? Where? Camp Discipline and Honor, about 2 hours north of the city. Former military personnel run specialized programs for kids who need extra structure. Derek knows the director personally, served with him in Afghanistan. Rebecca's eyes widened in alarm. She quickly pulled out her phone and started typing. A moment later, she showed me her screen. Camp DNH, closed by state authorities in 2018 for child abuse violations. Brad, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, I need details about this camp. Address, phone number, emergency contacts. Why? So you can call and interfere with Mason's treatment? Sarah, this is exactly the kind of helicopter parenting that got us into this situation. Derek says you need to learn to trust other adults to help Mason grow. I need to know where my son is. He's with his father and future stepfather, learning valuable life skills. You'll get a full report on Sunday when we drop him off. Although, given his progress with Derek's methods, we might want to discuss extending these leadership weekends on a regular basis. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone in horror. Rebecca was already on her laptop, pulling up information about the closed camp. Sarah, this is kidnapping, she said grimly. They can't take Mason out of state for 3 days without your permission, and they definitely can't take him to a facility that doesn't exist anymore. What do? We call the police. Right now. She was already dialing. And then we pray we can find them before 6 a.m. tomorrow. As Rebecca spoke rapidly to the emergency dispatcher, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Derek knows about our conversation. He's not taking Mason to any camp. They're driving to Derek's brother's house in Tennessee tonight. His brother runs an off-the-books boarding facility for problem children. If you don't get Mason before they cross state lines, you may never see him again. Tennessee. They were going to disappear with my son. I grabbed Rebecca's arm as she finished with the 911 dispatcher. They're not going to any camp. Derek's taking Mason to Tennessee tonight to his brother's illegal boarding facility. Rebecca's face went ashen. How do you know this? I showed her Stephanie's text, watching her expression shift from alarm to grim determination. We have maybe a 2-hour head start before they cross state lines. After that, this becomes a federal kidnapping case that could take weeks to resolve. While Mason disappears into some off-the-books facility where anything could happen to him, I finished, the reality hitting me like a physical blow. Rebecca was already grabbing her coat and car keys. The police are sending units to Brad's house and Stephanie's apartment. I'm calling Judge Morrison for an emergency protective order she handles after-hours family crisis situations. She paused at the door. Sarah, I need you to think. Does Mason have a cell phone? Any way to track him? No phone, but... My mind raced. His inhaler. He has mild asthma, and I got him one of those GPS medical alert devices last month after he had an attack at school. It's attached to his inhaler case. Can you track it? I fumbled with my phone, opening the medical alert app I'd barely used since setting it up. The loading screen felt like it took forever, but then a map appeared with a small blue dot moving steadily north on I-65. They're already 40 minutes out of the city, I whispered. Rebecca, what if we can't catch them? We will. She was typing frantically on her phone. I'm sending the GPS coordinates to Detective Martinez, she's the officer handling the emergency response. They're dispatching units along the interstate route. My phone rang. Detective Martinez. Mrs. Henderson, I'm en route to your ex-husband's residence, but the neighbors say they saw a black SUV leave around 7:30 p.m. with suitcases. We've issued a bolo alert for Derek Morrison's vehicle, but I need more information. Does your son have any medical conditions that would make this abduction especially dangerous? His asthma, but he has his inhaler. Detective, there's something else. Derek Morrison was discharged from the military under suspicious circumstances, and he's lied about his background to my ex-husband. He's also been systematically isolating and controlling everyone in that household. Ma'am, those are serious allegations. Do you have documentation? I looked at Rebecca, who nodded grimly. My attorney has compiled evidence of psychological abuse and manipulation. Detective, Derek's previous relationships all ended with restraining orders. He has a pattern of targeting single mothers and using their children as control mechanisms. I'm going to need all of that documentation tonight. But right now, my priority is intercepting that vehicle before they reach the Tennessee border. Keep monitoring that GPS device and call me immediately if they deviate from the current route. After she hung up, Rebecca and I sat in tense silence, watching the blue dot creep steadily northward. Every minute felt like an eternity. There, Rebecca said suddenly, pointing at her laptop screen. Judge Morrison just signed the emergency protective order. Mason is now under court protection, and Derek Morrison is officially prohibited from removing him from the state. But they're already gone. Which makes this custodial interference, not just a custody dispute. The FBI can get involved once they cross state lines. She closed her laptop decisively. Sarah, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. Even if we get Mason back tonight, Derek won't stop. Men like him don't accept defeat, they escalate. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Derek found out I contacted you. He's planning to disappear completely once they reach his brother's place. The facility operates under multiple fake names and moves kids between locations to avoid detection. This isn't just about custody anymore, he wants Mason to vanish entirely. I'm leaving Brad tonight. Emma and Jake's flight lands at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Please don't let Derek get his hands on any more children. S. I stared at the message, realizing with crystal clarity that Derek Morrison had never intended to play by any rules at all. At 11:43 p.m., Detective Martinez called with news that made my legs give out. Rebecca caught my arm as I sank into the nearest chair. We found Derek's SUV abandoned at a truck stop in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Empty. No signs of struggle, but there's evidence they switched vehicles. Her voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the underlying frustration. Mrs. Henderson, we're dealing with someone who planned this very carefully. What do you mean switched vehicles? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Security footage shows Derek and a man matching your ex-husband's description transferring luggage and what appears to be a child to a white panel van at 10:17 p.m. The van had no visible license plates and its registration comes back to a shell company. Rebecca grabbed my phone and put it on speaker. Detective, this is Rebecca Chen, Mrs. Henderson's attorney. Are you saying Derek had accomplices waiting? That's exactly what I'm saying. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to take Mason out of state. Someone was waiting at that specific truck stop with a vehicle designed to be untraceable. I heard papers rustling in the background. We also found Derek's cell phone in the abandoned SUV, which tells me he doesn't want to be found. The room started spinning. What about Mason's GPS tracker? Still showing movement, now heading east toward the Tennessee border on back roads. But Mrs. Chen, I have to tell you, these devices aren't designed for long-range tracking. If they get much further into the mountains, we might lose the signal entirely. I thought about Mason, probably confused and scared, being driven through the night by two men who had systematically planned his disappearance. Detective, how long before the FBI takes over? They're already involved. Agent Patricia Walsh, no relation to your psychologist, is coordinating with Tennessee authorities. But I'm going to be frank with you both. Cases like this, where the child is taken to an unregulated facility, can take months to resolve. These places are designed to keep kids isolated and move them frequently to avoid detection. Rebecca leaned closer to the phone. What about Brad? Surely he doesn't realize what Derek's really doing. That's what concerns me most. We contacted Mr. Mitchell's parents in Columbus. They haven't heard from him in 6 weeks, which matches exactly with when Derek Morrison moved in. His sister in Atlanta says the same thing. Detective Morrison has systematically cut your ex-husband off from every family member who might question his decisions. A horrible realization hit me. Detective, Brad's not an accomplice. He's another victim. Explain. I looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. Derek targets single parents and uses their children to control them. Stephanie told me he's been monitoring her finances, controlling her communication, isolating her from friends. What if he's done the same thing to Brad? What if Brad genuinely believes they're taking Mason somewhere to help him? You're saying your ex-husband might not know about his brother's illegal facility? I'm saying Derek is a master manipulator who's probably convinced Brad that Mason needs intensive treatment for behavioral problems that Derek himself created. My voice strengthened as the pieces clicked together. Brad threatened to fight me for custody because Derek convinced him I'm an unfit mother. He probably thinks tonight is about getting Mason proper help. Detective Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Henderson, that actually makes this situation more dangerous, not less. If your ex-husband realizes he's been manipulated and tries to leave with Mason, Derek Morrison becomes unpredictable. My phone suddenly chimed with a GPS alert. The blue dot had stopped moving. Detective, Mason's tracker just went stationary. Looks like. I squinted at the map. Somewhere called Millfield, Tennessee. Population 847. I'm sending units there now. Mrs. Henderson, I need you to stay by your phone. If that tracker moves again, or if anyone contacts you, call me immediately. After she hung up, Rebecca and I sat staring at the motionless blue dot on my phone screen. Mason was 180 miles away, probably terrified, with two men who had planned his disappearance for months. Rebecca, what if we're too late? What if Derek's brother's facility is designed to block GPS signals? What if Mason's inhaler gets taken away and we lose the only way to find him? She squeezed my hand tightly. Then we tear apart every illegal boarding facility in 3 states until we find him. But Sarah, that blue dot is still transmitting, which means Mason still has his inhaler, which means he's okay for now. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad's number. Sarah, something's wrong. Derek lied about everything. Help us. The text came through at 12:47 a.m., and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady enough to read it. Sarah, something's wrong. Derek lied about everything. Help us. I stared at the message, my heart hammering against my ribs. Rebecca leaned over to read it, her face pale in the harsh fluorescent lighting of her office. Could be a trap, she said quietly. Derek might have Brad's phone. Or Brad finally realized what's happening. I started typing back, then stopped. What do I say? What if Derek sees it? Before Rebecca could answer, my phone rang. Brad's number again. I looked at her, and she nodded grimly while hitting record on her own phone. Brad? I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah, thank God. Brad's voice was barely a whisper, and I could hear what sounded like wind in the background. I'm outside some kind of compound in the middle of nowhere. This isn't a camp. There are bars on the windows and kids in uniforms working in fields at midnight. My blood turned to ice. Where's Mason? Derek took him inside 2 hours ago for intake processing. They wouldn't let me come. Said parents interfere with the adjustment period. His voice cracked. Sarah, I heard screaming from the building. Children screaming. Rebecca grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with alarm. She mouthed, keep him talking, while frantically typing on her laptop. Brad, you need to get Mason and leave. Right now. I tried. The gate is locked electronically, and Derek has the only code. He told me it's for security, but... There was a long pause. Sarah, I found his real military records in the van. He wasn't just discharged. He was court-martialed for assaulting 3 recruits. One of them was hospitalized. The room started spinning. Brad, listen to me very carefully. The police are looking for you. Detective Martinez has FBI agents on the way to your location. How do you know where we are? Mason's inhaler has a GPS tracker. We've been following you all night. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Brad spoke again, his voice was hollow with realization. He planned this. All of it. The engagement to Stephanie, moving in with us, even dating me in the first place. He researched our divorce proceedings and targeted our family specifically. What do you mean? I found files in his bag, Sarah. Dozens of families, all divorced parents with young sons. He's done this before. Multiple times. Brad's voice became more urgent. There are photos of other kids, court documents, even medical records. One folder is labeled current projects with Mason's name and 2 other boys, Emma's brother Jake and someone named Tyler Morrison in Colorado. Rebecca's face went white. She held up her laptop screen showing a missing child alert from Denver dated 3 months ago. Tyler Morrison, age 8, disappeared during a custody visit with his father's new girlfriend's boyfriend. Brad, you have to find Mason and get out of there. Derek isn't going to let either of you leave. I know. I can see him through the window of the main building. He's talking to a man in military fatigues, and they keep pointing toward the dormitory where Mason is. His voice became muffled, like he was covering the phone. Sarah, there are other parents here. 3 other fathers standing around looking confused while their kids are inside. I think we've all been manipulated. Can you get them to help you? Maybe. One of them is asking questions about when we can see our sons. The man in charge told him family contact interferes with behavioral modification for the first 30 days. Brad's breathing became rapid. 30 days, Sarah. Derek planned to keep Mason here for 30 days minimum. Rebecca held up a note, stall time. FBI ETA 23 minutes. Brad, the FBI is almost there. 23 minutes. Can you stay hidden and keep eyes on that building? I'm going to try to get closer, see if I can figure out which room Mason is in. But Sarah, if something happens to me, you need to know Derek has been recording everything. Our phone calls, conversations in the house, even private moments between Mason and me. He's been building a case to prove you're an unfit mother using completely fabricated evidence. The line crackled with static, and I heard Derek's voice in the background, loud and angry. Where the hell is Mitchell? He was supposed to wait in the van. I have to go, Brad whispered. If I don't make it out, tell Mason I'm sorry. Tell him his dad loves him and none of this was his fault. Brad, don't do anything stupid. Just hide until. The call went dead. I stared at my phone in horror, realizing my ex-husband was about to do something desperate to save our son, and there was nothing I could do to help him except pray the FBI arrived before Derek Morrison discovered Brad was no longer the compliant victim he'd spent months creating. The next 22 minutes were the longest of my life. Rebecca and I sat in her office, staring at my phone screen where Mason's GPS tracker remained motionless in Millfield, Tennessee. Every few seconds, I'd refresh the location, praying the blue dot would start moving toward the exit. At 1:31 a.m., my phone rang again. Unknown number. Sarah Henderson? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI. I'm currently positioned outside the Millfield facility with a tactical team. We have eyes on the compound, but I need you to walk me through everything you know about Derek Morrison's methods and the layout of this place. I put her on speaker so Rebecca could help. Agent Walsh, my ex-husband Brad is somewhere on those grounds. He called 22 minutes ago and said Derek was becoming suspicious. We're aware. We've identified 4 adult males on the property, 1 matching Derek Morrison's description, 1 we believe is your ex-husband, and 2 we think are facility operators. There are also approximately 12 children visible in the dormitory building. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. Mrs. Henderson, what can you tell me about how Derek manipulates his victims? He targets their insecurities. With Brad, it was fear that Mason didn't respect him as a father. Derek convinced him that military-style discipline would fix their relationship. I gripped the phone tighter. But Agent Walsh, Brad has been isolated from his family for months. Derek's probably told him that I'm working with authorities to take Mason away permanently. That matches what we're seeing. Heat signatures show your ex-husband moving between buildings, apparently searching for something. But Derek Morrison and the facility director are also mobile, and they appear to be coordinating some kind of response. Rebecca leaned toward the phone. Agent Walsh, this is Rebecca Chen, Mrs. Henderson's attorney. We have evidence that Derek has done this before with other families. There could be children in that facility who've been missing for months. We're prepared for that possibility. But right now, my priority is preventing this situation from escalating. Mrs. Henderson, if Derek contacts you directly, I need you to keep him talking while we move into position. Based on his military background, he's likely to view this as a tactical situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad's number, found Mason. Building 3, room 7. They have him sedated. Getting him out now. My heart stopped. Agent Walsh, Brad just texted that Mason is sedated. He's going to try to get him out himself. Damn it. That's exactly what we didn't want to happen. I heard rapid communication in the background, radio chatter, and urgent voices. Mrs. Henderson, Derek Morrison just received some kind of alert on his radio. He's moving toward Building 3 with 2 other men. You have to stop him. We're moving in, but this facility has multiple exit points and we're dealing with a hostage situation now. If Derek realizes he's trapped, he might use the children as leverage. The GPS tracker on my phone suddenly flickered, then disappeared entirely. Agent Walsh, I lost Mason's signal. We see him. Your ex-husband just exited Building 3 carrying a child. But Mrs. Henderson, Derek Morrison is 50 yards behind him with what appears to be a weapon. I couldn't breathe. Through my phone, I could hear shouting in the distance, then Agent Walsh's voice became sharp and commanding, this is FBI. Drop your weapon and step away from the child. The line went quiet except for static and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Rebecca grabbed my hand as we waited for any sign that Mason and Brad were safe. Then, cutting through the silence, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, Mason's voice, scared but strong, calling Daddy, in the background of Agent Walsh's phone. We have them, Agent Walsh said finally. Your son and ex-husband are safe. Derek Morrison is in custody. At 4:17 a.m., I finally held my son in my arms in the emergency room of Millfield General Hospital. Mason was groggy from whatever sedative they'd given him, but his eyes were clear and he recognized me immediately. Mom, I was so scared, he whispered against my shoulder. Mr. Derek said you didn't want me anymore and that's why I had to stay at the special school. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Even in the middle of kidnapping my child, Derek had been poisoning Mason's mind against me. Baby, that's not true. Mommy has been looking for you all night. I will always want you. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric physician examining Mason, pulled me aside while a nurse drew blood for a toxicology screen. The sedative appears to be a mild anti-anxiety medication, probably to keep him compliant during transport. He's physically unharmed, but I'm concerned about the psychological impact. What do you mean? Mason keeps asking permission for everything, to sit down, to use the bathroom, even to speak to me directly. And he flinched when I tried to check his blood pressure until I explained exactly what I was doing. She glanced back at Mason, who was sitting rigidly upright on the examination table. Mrs. Henderson, this kind of conditioning can take months of therapy to undo. Through the window, I could see Brad in the hallway talking to Agent Walsh. His face was pale and drawn, and his hands shook as he signed what looked like official documents. When he caught my eye, the guilt and anguish in his expression was devastating. Agent Walsh entered Mason's room 20 minutes later with a tablet and a gentle smile. Hey there, Mason. I'm Agent Walsh. I help find kids who get lost. Can you tell me about the place where you stayed tonight? Mason looked at me for permission before answering. There were lots of other kids there. They all had to wear the same gray clothes and they weren't allowed to talk during meals. His voice got smaller. One boy named Alex said he'd been there for 67 days and his mom didn't know where he was. Agent Walsh made notes on her tablet. Did the adults there tell you why you had to stay? Mr. Derek said I was sick and needed special medicine to make me a good boy. He said my dad agreed that I was too disrespectful and needed to learn proper behavior. Mason's eyes filled with tears. But I tried really hard to be good, Mom. I followed all the rules. You were good, sweetheart. None of this was your fault. Agent Walsh looked up from her notes. Mrs. Henderson, we found evidence of 12 children at the facility who were brought there under false pretenses. 3 had been missing from their home states for over 2 months. Derek Morrison and his brother Carl were running what amounts to a kidnapping operation disguised as a therapeutic boarding school. What about the other fathers Brad mentioned? 2 are being questioned as potential victims of manipulation, similar to your ex-husband. 1 appears to have been a willing participant and is facing charges. She closed her tablet. Derek Morrison will be charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and operating an unlicensed facility. But Mrs. Henderson, I need to warn you, his lawyer is already claiming this was a custody dispute gone wrong, not a criminal enterprise. Before I could respond, Rebecca burst through the hospital room door, still in yesterday's clothes and clutching a thick folder. Sarah, we have a problem. Stephanie never made it out of Brad's house last night. Her children's flight from Phoenix landed 3 hours ago, and Derek's associate picked them up from the airport using forged custody documents. My blood turned to ice. Emma and Jake are now missing too. And according to airport security footage, the man who took them matches the description of Carl Morrison, Derek's brother who's currently in federal custody. Rebecca's face was grim. Sarah, Derek had backup plans. Even from jail, his network is still operating. Agent Walsh was already reaching for her radio. We need to find those children before they disappear into another facility. 6 weeks later, I sat in a packed courtroom watching Derek Morrison receive a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. The judge's voice was stern as she read the charges: kidnapping across state lines, operating an unlicensed detention facility, conspiracy to defraud the family court system, and child endangerment affecting 14 victims in 4 states. Mason squeezed my hand from the seat beside me. He'd insisted on being there for the sentencing, even though Dr. Walsh had warned it might be difficult for him. I want to see them put the bad man in jail, Mom, he'd said with a kind of fierce determination that reminded me he was stronger than Derek had ever given him credit for. Behind us, I could hear quiet crying. Stephanie sat with Emma and Jake, who'd been found safe at a secondary facility in Alabama after a 3-day FBI manhunt. Emma, now 8, still flinched at loud noises, but she'd started speaking again last week. Jake, only 6 when Derek's associates took him from the airport, had recovered more quickly thanks to his young age and the fact that he'd only been missing for 18 hours before agents found him. The defendant systematically targeted vulnerable families and used sophisticated psychological manipulation to facilitate the abduction and abuse of children, Judge Patricia Morrison continued. This court finds that Derek Morrison represents an ongoing danger to society and sentences him to serve his full term without possibility of parole. Derek turned to look at our section of the courtroom one final time. His cold gray eyes found mine, and even now, even in shackles, he tried to project that same intimidating authority that had terrorized my son. But all I saw was a pathetic man who'd spent his life hurting children because he couldn't handle his own failures. Mason didn't flinch when Derek stared at him. Instead, my 9-year-old son sat up straighter and looked Derek Morrison directly in the eyes until the bailiff led him away forever. After the hearing, Brad approached us in the courthouse lobby. The past 6 weeks had changed him dramatically. He'd lost weight, started therapy, and moved back in with his parents while he worked to rebuild his relationship with Mason. Most importantly, he'd stopped making excuses for what had happened. Mason, buddy, you did great in there, Brad said, kneeling down to his son's level. I'm really proud of how brave you've been through all of this. Thanks, Dad. Dr. Walsh says it's okay to be scared sometimes, but we can't let scary people make us forget who we really are. Mason hugged his father tightly. She also says you were tricked too, and that means you're not bad, just confused. Brad's eyes filled with tears. I was very confused, son. But I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Not ever. We walked out of the courthouse together, not as a reunited family, but as 3 people committed to healing the damage Derek Morrison had inflicted on our lives. Brad would continue supervised visitation with Mason every Wednesday and Saturday afternoon, gradually rebuilding the trust Derek had systematically destroyed. Stephanie had moved back to Phoenix with Emma and Jake, closer to her sister's family and far away from the memories of Tennessee. As for Mason, he still asked permission sometimes when he didn't need to, and he still had nightmares about men in gray uniforms. But every day, he remembered a little more about who he'd been before Derek Morrison tried to break his spirit. Yesterday, he'd built a blanket fort in our living room and asked if his dad could come see it. Last night, for the first time in 4 months, I heard my son laugh until his sides hurt. Some victories take time to fully understand, but watching Derek Morrison disappear behind steel doors while Mason sat beside me, healthy and whole and finally safe, felt like the most important battle I'd ever won.